Hollow Knight speedruns are frankly quite fascinating. Every single skip, strategy, and route has a story behind it, and as a speedrunner, I could talk about this for hours. So today I picked one of the most interesting stories in all of Hollow Knight speedrunning to do a deep dive on. The story of Hollow Knight's most broken charm, and the story of how one great hopper changed everything. Let's get into it. If you're the average player, or, read the video title, you might notice that there's something slightly off with this image. Notably, there's a charm in the S tier that seems like it doesn't belong. Yeah, that's right. Today, I'll be telling you why Shaman Stone is the worst charm in the game. Yeah, no. This is the story of the charm that could deal an absolutely ridiculous amount of damage, could multiply your geogain dozens of times, and kill bosses before even entering the arena. This is the story of the charm that was patched again and again and again and again, yet somehow remained incredibly powerful. Today, I'm taking a deep dive into what makes this charm the most broken charm in the game to this day, and how it has come to be useful in Hollow Knight speedruns across a variety of categories and patches, despite how Team Cherry tried to fix it over and over and over and over and over. You get the point. This is the story of Flukenest. Flukenest is weird, to say the least. Aside from being obtained upon beating that thing, oh yikes, it's actually a very unique charm. There is no other equipable in the game that can alter the fundamental mechanics of one of your main spells. But before we get to the fun stuff, let's get some quick facts sorted out. I'll try to be brief about this so that we can move on to the actually interesting part of this video, I promise. Flukenest replaces the player's horizontal spellcast with a shotgun-like burst of 9 to 16 flukes, for Vengeful Spirit and Shade Soul respectively. This leads to a total cast damage of 36 for the former and 64 for the latter, since the flukes do 4 damage each. Flukenest is also buffed by Shaman Stone, just like the regular spells. With Shaman Stone equipped, each fluke deals 5 damage instead of 4, increasing the total damage to 45 for base spells and 80 for Shade Soul. Oh, and it also costs 3 entire notches, which is a very, very steep price. At this point, you would be completely right to dismiss this charm, because why would you spend extra 3 notches to drastically cut down the range of your spell when you could just Shade Soul double hit and deal 80 damage anyway? If this is what you're thinking right now, then you would be correct. Sort of. Let me explain. If this was all there is to the charm, you would be completely right to dismiss it, but here's the catch. What I just described is how the charm is supposed to work. The reality is that Flukenest is far from a properly functioning charm. The brokenness of Flukenest over the years is a very interesting story to take a look at. I sat down and researched the changes made to the charm across every single patch and beta of the game, and here's what I found. Let's get into it. Part 1. Broken Beginnings. For the first half year of the game's release, Flukenest was quite an overlooked charm. It dealt weak damage and generally wasn't worth the hassle of equipping. Something to keep in mind though is that the charm only used to cost 2 notches as opposed to the current day 3. However, everything changed overnight when Team Cherry released the Hidden Dreams content update. Hidden Dreams truly had everything a person could hope for. 2 new awesome boss fights with a new soundtrack to accompany them. Dreamgate, a new stag station, and of course, a massive buff to Flukenest. The charm's damage had been buffed significantly. Quick side note, the official patch notes published by William Pellin on August 3rd, 2017 didn't specify how big this buff was, which I think is part of the reason that no one really knew how powerful it had become. That is, no one except for the speedrunners. Flukenest was now dealing an entire 112 damage per full cast without Shaman Stone, and 144 damage with Shaman equipped. For some perspective, if you had the maximum nail upgrade, as well as both strength and fury active at the same time, you would only be dealing 56 damage per nail hit, exactly half of what a non-Shaman Stone, let me repeat, non-Shaman Stone fluke would deal in a single cast. But there's more. Here comes the spicy part. While buffing the charm, Team Cherry somehow dropped a big plate of spaghetti code on top of it, and weirdness ensued as weirdness does. Somehow, Flukenest now had the ability to kill the same enemy multiple times. You can now, for example, kill a single Watcher 6 different times with a single cast of Flukes, which would trick the game into thinking that 6 separate Watcher Knights had been vanquished and instantly end the fight. The same mistake in Flukenest's code also made it possible to multiply Geogain from an enemy, such as Gorgeous Husk for example, by killing it with Flukes. This would earn you thousands upon thousands of Geo from a single cast of the spell. The powers of Team Cherry Spaghetti Code had granted the speedrunners a miracle, and use it they did. You need Geo? 6,000 Geo from Gorgeous Husk coming right up. You're doing the Colosseum of Fools? I dupe it all. I don't know what's going on. I can't explain this to you. I literally don't understand what's going on the screen right now, because it's all just so broken and weird and... Moving on. Hollow Knight had a new, most powerful charm, and the glorious reign of Flukenest had begun. The glorious reign of Flukenest lasted for about 3 days, when Team Cherry realized their mistake and promptly patched out all of the weirdness on update 1.1.1.6. The spaghetti had been unspilled. It was over. F's in the chat. The runners had had their fun, and it was time to move on. Or was it? The charm was still ridiculously powerful, with or without the duplicate kill glitch, and quickly became a part of the new meta. Flukenest stayed completely unchanged throughout the Grim Troop update, all the way until the Lifeblood update. This is an important detail to mention, since most main categories are run on patch 1.2.2.1, the final patch of the Grim Troop DLC. Most notable use of Flukenest is actually seen in the 106% category, which is the maximum completion category equivalent for that patch. Part 2, the 1221 era, the golden age of no major glitches Flukenest. Along with patching the multi-kill glitch, Team Cherry also nerfed the charm by 1 Shaman Stone. In other words, the charm now dealt 112 damage per cast with Shaman Stone and only 80 without. Despite this, it was still a ridiculous amount of damage and very much worth the cost, especially considering the fact that it only used to cost 2 notches. And wouldn't you have guessed, without knowing, Team Cherry had somehow managed to break the charm again, in a slightly more subtle way this time. In changing the mechanics of the charm to fix the previously stated issues, along with a bug that made the Fluke simply not interact with some bosses, Team Cherry inadvertently broke it again. Now, Flukes didn't add to the stagger combo count of bosses, and therefore weren't able to wake up bosses who were staggered. This might seem like a very minor thing, but it was able to cause absolute carnage in boss fights. You could, for example, stagger a boss like Hornet 2, spam a few cast of Flukes, and there you go, that's 350 health gone. Some bosses, like Nosk and Brooding Moloch, could even be killed before you even entered the arena. This was due to them having their hitboxes exposed before the fight began. Since Flukenest didn't interact with stagger values at all, you were free to simply hurl a few Flukes into the boss from safety, sometimes ending the fight before it even started. I could keep listing Fluke quick kill strats forever, man. They're so much fun to look at. Like, take this Marmy one for example, where you shoot 2 Flukes into the corner and she just flies straight in and dies immediately. For those that want to see a few more of these, I highly recommend you check out Scruffy's 106% world record. Stuff is wild. But then, one dark April night in 2018, Team Cherry released the Lifeblood update. Speedrunners watched in shock as their beloved glitches and speed strats were taken away from them. Lever skips? Gone. Wall cling storage? Gone. Inventory drops and explosion pogo? Kinda gone? I don't really know how to explain this one. Moving on. This was the great culling of glitches. But worst of all is what they did to poor Flukenest. Team Cherry had finally seen what the charm was capable of, and decided to end it right then and there. And end it they did. On patch 1.3.1.5, otherwise known as the Lifeblood update, Flukenest was patched into the ground. 80 damage with Shaman Stone, 64 without. No more broken interactions. The speedrunners pleaded, "Will you at least let us keep the 2 notch cost now that the charm is literally worthless?" "Nuh-uh," Team Cherry said. 3. Team Cherry had set their foot down. Flukenest was now so incredibly unusable that everyone simply forgot about it. But hey, look at this cool boss they added! Part 3. The Dark Ages. After the Lifeblood patch, Flukenest sunk back into the shadows, now a shriveled husk of its former self. Which is a weird description because it already kinda looked like a shriveled husk thing before. Of course, speedrunners could still downpatch, but Flukenest went from a top contender among charms to being considered one of the worst pieces of garbage in the game, which is very generous considering the existence of Heavy Blow. Oh, so now you're clicking off the video? I'm not allowed to install Heavy Blow, huh? This charm literally sucks in every way except for the name, because god does this charm blow heavily. Like, it really blows other charms out of the water pretty heavily when it comes to literally decreasing your nail damage output by pushing enemies away from you. Yeah, I know it lowers the stagger criteria on bosses, but like, cool, you can stun lock Loskin anyway, nice waste of notches. Sorry, I got a little carried away. Moving on. Flukenest remained in the shadows for a long time. All the Lifeblood patches came and went, and so did the Godmaster ones. After the release of patch 1.4.3.2 on August 27th of 2018, Hollow Knight would not receive another update for over 2.5 years. The game was finished now, and runners knew there wouldn't ever be another era of Flukenest glory. Or so they thought, since Team Cherry, being Team Cherry, had broken the charm again in time for Godmaster and forgotten to include the changes in the patch notes. Cause, of course they did, they're Team Cherry. Because they didn't include anything mentioning Flukenest in the patch notes, no one bothered to look. But as the years passed, it was only a matter of time until this groundbreaking discovery was made. Between the years of 2018 and 2021, Flukenest became somewhat of a meme with current patch runners. And since there were no new updates to the game that could mix things up, it was kind of forgotten. No one tried to find out if the charm was still somehow viable because there wasn't really a reason to. It would never be as good as it once was and no changes were being made to it ever again. Now, where does this great hopper that I mentioned earlier fit into this picture? Well, let's talk about the Great Hopper. It took the speedrunning community almost 3 years to discover Flukenest's newfound efficiency. On the 6th of June 2021, speedrunner EarlyNot posted a clip of themselves dealing an unusual amount of damage with the charm while fighting a Great Hopper. Somehow EarlyNot had managed to kill a Great Hopper with a single cast of Flukes, despite Flukes dealing 80 damage and the Hopper having an entire 130 hit points. A mix of confusion and amusement arose in the speedrunning community. Of course, Team Cherry had managed to break the charm again. It was now just a question of finding out what was happening and how to harness the brokenness for combat. Upon analysis of the footage and testing of the charm, runners concluded that there was something funky going on with Flukenest's hitboxes. The Great Hopper had gotten hit initially, then somehow fallen back on top of the hitboxes of the cast, which were lingering for an unintended amount of time. This meant that Flukenest projectiles could seemingly damage a single enemy multiple times if the enemy in question was shifting its hitboxes over the Flukes, potentially dealing upwards of 300 damage per cast in certain situations. This was an absolutely massive discovery. At first, runners assumed this change had happened as part of the new 1.5 betas Team Cherry had been releasing recently. But soon they found out that this had been a thing ever since the Godhome DLC originally released 3 years prior. Looking back, it's absolutely crazy that such a big thing passed right under everyone's noses for so long. Either way, runners got to work, testing which bosses this was effective on. The discoveries made prove you could shave off incredible time on most bosses, but especially ones such as White Defender and Nosk if you knew how to use the Flukes properly. The strategies were gimmicky, but once you learned to understand the hitboxes, you could unleash utter carnage. Both runners of the 107% and 112% all Pantheon bosses categories started theorizing about adapting to Flukenest routes once again. But the ones who were the first to do it were the Pantheon runners. Very soon, Flukenest use started popping up in Pantheon 1 individual level world records, and it was clear that Flukenest was here to stay. Despite all the patching and fixing attempts, here it was once again being used at a top level. It took a while to bring Flukenest to the big 100% categories, and due to the routing of getting Flukenest early, it didn't save as much time as many as hoped. 112% all Pantheon bosses speedrun world record Valigo, who was the first to implement the fluke route into the category, estimated it was a matter of half a minute at most. And that brings us to the current day. We thought we would never see the day where Flukenest was viable on current patch again, yet here we are. I guess the one takeaway from this story that matters is the following. Always test out Flukenest after a Hollow Knight update, even if it's not in the patch notes. Historically, it has always worked. Thank you for watching. Oh, and always remember to kill great hoppers for no reason. Who knows what you'll find?